So, for context, I spend my time on venture capital, academic research, public policy, and some family office advisory work. I presented at BN last year and at the annual Freebus conference the year before. So when I submitted my application for this event, I expected to deliver a presentation about the birth gap and how to solve it. In the run-up, the UK has faced disturbances, riots, protests over sovereignty, and as I understand it, UBI as a feature has been disproved. So it's certainly a busy time for us. In 2020, I proposed a simple tweak to the tax system. If we introduce an asset tax or a wealth tax, we can let income tax contribute toward that wealth tax. Plus, if the income tax a person is due to pay is greater than the wealth tax they are due to pay, the government lets them save their excess, building their wealth reserves. So the proposal also included an upgrade of the state pension to a lifetime state pension, i.e. a universal basic income. So since then, I've been iterating on the problem solution bit of the lifetime state pension proposal, much like a startup would. And with this presentation, I believe that I have found that problem solution fit and I'll do my best to illustrate how to fund that lifetime state pension through a process of minimizing the upper bound of affordability. So the tax mechanism asset-derived tax is not precisely a wealth tax, but it fully the idea is that we fully replace income tax revenues and some other taxes with wealth tax revenues. For our purposes today, we can safely put income taxes to one side and only focus on assets and generating tax revenues from those assets. I'll provide a bit more context on the mechanics in the discussion phase. I realize it's Saturday and we don't want a huge amount of maths necessarily. So we are living the reality of economist Danny Roderick's globalization trilemma. The concept is simple enough. We cannot have democracy or here welfare, nation-state sovereignty, and global economic integration all at the same time, not without a major breakthrough. So the first way to think about welfare in this respect, is the false debate as to the fundamental problem that society faces today. The United Nations claims that it's poverty. Elon claims that it's underpopulation, while I think both are only partially true. The real answer, as Stephen J. Shaw says, is the birth gap, the proportion of unwanted childlessness in each country around the world. The second way to think about welfare is in technological advancement. So in the UK, we have a system of welfare called universal credit, a monthly amount of money that unemployed people can sign on to be paid to seek work. While the system is better than nothing, it largely feeds itself and is breaking. Specifically, the system does not take into account the rate at which work can be automated. It simply seeks to fill people into work in the short term. I anticipate that the rate of recidivism back onto the system will increase dramatically in the near future. As time goes on, the amount of time people spend in those jobs will decrease because they can be automated more and more easily. So in some sense, universal credit will soon be better described as a broken universal basic income program with an unnecessarily high administrative burden. We must restructure it, most likely by removing permissions from the income and incentivizing people to work through a tax curve skewed low for the asset poor. The system must also not create any negative externalities that are greater than those of the current system, such as price controls in low asset countries. So to solve the birth gap, we need a sustainable lifetime national state pension in every country around the world. We know that unwanted childlessness is directly affected by economic downturns. Specifically, when a recession hits a country, its birth rate falls. It falls and it stays low. And I think that the state pension is the antidote. We can increase the state pension each time a downturn hits to maintain financial stability and the birth rate. As such, in every country, we need to introduce a state pension such that the birth rate maintains at 2.1 and maintain the pension at least at the at least at this level. The system definitely needs to be concentric. At its most basic level, the national state pension is underpinned by a global state pension, meaning that everyone receives a global minimum floor, and we address the root causes of problems from emigrant countries rather than exacerbating the existing mass immigration and non-assimilation issues that countries like the UK and the US already have. This is further coupled by the citizenship requirement at which one receives their state pension. There is, of course, a long tail of detail which I've presented before to ensure that the funding mechanism works properly. This includes an upgrade of council tax to a Harburger tax, replacing income tax revenue and a long tail of other tax revenues with asset-derived revenues, and repurposing the income tax threshold as a savings apportionment rate to encourage wealth building. The mechanism also replaces much of the rhetoric around wealth inequality, social mobility, climate contributions, and reparations with something more tangible. So estimating a person's wealth is hard and hard at the best of times. I used to work for a family office, an entity that manages a wealthy family's assets. And to this day, I have absolutely no idea how much wealth they have. Given the asset concentration and the fact that the proposed tax system is asset derived, I am trying to circumvent the microdata problem as much as possible. Credit Suisse, in its Global Wealth Data Book of 2022, said the following in describing the wealth Gini coefficient calculation methodology. The survey data which yield most of our wealth distribution estimates tend to underrepresent the wealthiest groups and to omit high net worth individuals. This deficiency does not affect our estimates of average wealth levels around the world, since these are determined by other methods. But it does imply that the shares of the top percentile and top decile are likely to err on the low side unless adjustments are made to the upper tail. We would also not expect accurate predictions of the number and value of holdings of high net worth individuals. So the point I'm trying to make here is that using Gini coefficients to estimate wealth distribution will yield an underestimate in the wealth at the top of the distribution. Hence, if we can demonstrate that we can tax that part of the distribution for the single most wealthy person and below from there, to a degree that they would find acceptable, then our upper bound on the tax curve is acceptable. When implemented, their tax burden would actually be lower. In a paper titled A Simple Method for Estimating the Lorenz Curve, two Thai researchers demonstrated that we can generate a closed form of the Lorenz curve using three indicators: the Gini coefficient, and here the percentage wealth share of the bottom and top M%. So I have expanded on this to determine an estimate for how much wealth each person in a given country has. After generating that Lorenz curve, I quote unquote unnormalize it by shaping the curve to reflect the amount of wealth in the country and the number of people. Differentiating this wealth curve then yields estimates for the amount of wealth that each person in the country has. I then apply a tax curve T, which has gradient M, to this non-cumulative wealth distribution, and then integrate it again, equating it to our desired tax revenue T to solve M. We can then increase that tax revenue requirement, essentially, by the required funds for national and global state pensions, which change that M value. We can then read off the effective tax rates of the very wealthiest people in the country from there and make judgments about implementation. Okay, so implementing a system like this is, of course, not without its challenges. For low asset countries, implementing a global state pension raises concerns about inflation due to increased money flow. To mitigate this, the state pension is taxed, converting some of the cash to assets, and people have existing financial plans for spending, helping us prepare for sudden demand surges. Some money people receive is also invested into new businesses and business infrastructure. And we can expect that a lag between cash receipt and investment is likely short term. For mid-asset countries, social mobility and wealth building become greater factors. Home ownership has historically driven social mobility, but supply issues persist. Asset-derived tax and Harburger tax can help with wealth diversification and reduce loan dependency. Building wealth through raising and growing capital is crucial, but some political approaches concerning carried interest actively hinder this. The system could also improve intellectual property law and reduce the need for remittances. For high asset countries, asset exit is the greatest risk. The system needs universal implementation to be effective, and short-term exit taxes may be necessary in the wealthiest jurisdictions to prevent capital flight. Tax havens could be repurposed for the ultra-rich to contribute directly to the global state pension. Payment for residency systems could also be implemented in some jurisdictions. And actually, asset transfers may be a better option for tax payments in some circumstances, made possible by the real-time asset valuation that the Harburger taxes provide. So overall, the system is fundamentally power resistant, especially compared to universal basic services models, which under a regime of increasing wealth inequality, become increasingly plutocratic and corruptible. However, there are no solutions, only trade-offs, and this proposal does not fix government. Now, in the last few minutes, let's talk about critique. The greatest critique of universal basic income comes from my favorite economist, Thomas Sowell. He rightly says that UBI could disincentivize people from working, essentially purchasing them out of the labor market. However, I find that this is a conflation between UBI and the mechanism that funds it. Welfare is set up today such that it is below the poverty line, ostensibly to act as an incentive to work, while what this proposed system does is to set the state pension at a reasonable minimum floor and incentivizes people to work under a system with drastically lower tax rates. The failure of much of the third wave of basic income arises from the false assumption that UBI and wealth taxes will be added on to the existing system. This has become apparent.
Sorry,
is that a 5-minute warning?
5 minutes only. Yeah, we still have a little time. Could you just give us a quick wrap up, because we also have the Q&A session as well. So we need, people in 22 minutes for each one. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I see. I think you're all getting the picture on what I'm trying to say here. Some solutions work really well, others not so much, and we're seeing a change in what is implementable and what is not. So, yeah, let's move toward wrap up. So, I think that if UBI is affordable without increasing debt, we will basically determine that via a mechanism like this. There's definitely more work that needs to be done, especially with regard to introducing large amounts of cash to societies with few assets. Obviously, this is an illustration. We've glossed over detail. There is more detail available. The video version, well, there is a version of this presentation already available. If you scan this QR code, that will go through an update in the next couple of weeks as I receive feedback. I will soon produce a calculator to test edge cases and expect to publish a paper on it in the next couple of months. That's my time. Thank you very much.